Hi and welcome to a Thrasios Vile Smasher Valakut deck tech video. But first, let's do some orientation. So I'm a lands archetype kinda guy. I've always wanted to build good decks with Valakut. It's like the deck I played mostly in casual EDH, and I wanted to bring it into a cEDH power level where it could function against other decks at that strength. So it's been a journey. I have built builds with Gollus, Lord Windgrace, the Planeswalker land dude, and the other Yund Soul of Windgrace creature as well. But after all my playtesting, this is what you wanna be on Thrasios and Vile Smasher. And I should mention now that this is an update video. I've already actually made a deck tech video for this commander pair and this deck tech video, but I've played it so much that I think an update is in requirement. Especially because I've learned a lot of new things for this deck. So let's just begin with a clean, straight up combo. Adnos, Valakut, Mana Bond. That's it! You need to cast your Adnos. And we're gonna have a really high ratio of lands inside this deck and a really low CMC. So we're gonna be able to dig through close to a big portion of the deck. We're gonna get to that later because that's where the update is coming. But you're gonna draw into tutors or Valakut and Mana Bond or tutors for Mana Bond. And then you basically just put some free to cast rocks into play. For example, flipping Mox Diamond doesn't lose you any form of life as its CMC is 0, so you cast it for free, and now you get the green mana to cast Mox Mana Bond. So this is a really unique card. 1 green mana. During your discard phase, you may choose to put all land cards from your hand into play. If you do, discard the rest of your hand. And when you do that with your Valakut and all your mountains that you acquired, you're gonna get a lot of Valakut triggers. Now you're not gonna do infinite damage, but you're gonna do enough. So if you just throw up this calculation here, 3 times 40 equals 120, which means that you need 40 mountains and Valakut to come into play together from the Mana Bond to do 120 damage, which is the amount of damage we need to kill all 3 opponents. That's a lot of mountains. However, with Vesuva, it becomes 6 times 20, which is still the 120 damage we need. So now you only need 20 mountains to kill all of your 3 opponents. Also, we should mention that your opponents aren't gonna be on the maximum 40 life. They're probably gonna lose life a little bit here and there. So the amount of mountains will decrease as well. So let's say something like 18, 17 mountains to kill all opponents early in the game. But a big reminder here is that you need to have Valakut in play before you go to your Mana Bond and discard phase to get Vesuva to come into play as a copy of Valakut. Valakut has to be in play before Vesuva for Vesuva to become a Valakut. That's basically the deck. A Valakut Land Thrasios Mountain deck. With the 1 card combo Ad Nauseam. And now Ad Nauseam is creating a deck construction restriction here. You have to play a really low CMC ratio because you want to dig really deep in your deck, right? Well, that's where there have been an update. So when I initially built this deck, I wanted the CMC ratio of the entire deck collection, all the cards together, to be really low as humanly possible. I think I had something like 44 CMC total. So if you look at all the cards I have here, you can notice that everything is on CMC 1 or CMC 2 or CMC 0. Then we have 50 lands. I don't have a single free CMC card inside the entire deck. And if we would calculate all the CMC cards here together, we get a total value of 45. Not calculating in Ad Nauseam, by the way. And this means that the capacity for Ad Nauseam to dig really deep is pretty good. But also, here's the cool thing. The fact that you don't have a single free CMC card inside the entire deck. I guess Rhystic Study would be amazing to have inside this deck, so I guess you could include Rhystic Study if you wanted to, but the fact that we don't have a single one of those is that we can go all the way down to 2 life remaining. For example, a normal Ad Nauseam deck with Blue Farm or any one of the swords usually play like Force of Will, so when they get down to like 5 life remaining, they kinda have to stop. Now they could theoretically dig a little bit more because Force of Will isn't gonna pop up like the next card, but they kinda have to stop because if they accidentally flip into Force of Will, they die. With this deck, you don't have that risk. There's no CMC free card that's gonna kill you, so when you're at 3 life, you can continue. If you flip a 2 CMC spell, you should stop. If you flip a 1 seems to spell, you have 2 life, you should stop. I should mention, by the way, that staying on 3 life might be kind of good sometimes, because Vamp Tutor is a card that we need to use sometimes to find the cards we need to win the game. Also, oh, I took out Gitaxian Probe, never mind. Yeah, that makes sense. You don't need the Gitaxian Probe inside this deck. Oh, I guess you could have a Gitaxian Probe inside this deck. But a deck with 50 lands can't be good, right? Well, yes and no. True fifths, you have to mulligan quite aggressively. And, well, find hands that you can actually get somewhere. So this is a hand that is kind of fine. We have a Dockside turn 2, and Dockside turn 2 will always do something. And then we have Training Grounds for a Thrasios, we have a Tutor, we're gonna talk about that Tutor soon, but then we have some Mana Dorks, we're gonna get Thrasios into play, we're gonna be able to sit and activate Training Grounds, Thrasios, Gaia's Cradle. Yeah, this is a hand that could get somewhere. This is not a keep, obvious choice, throw this away. Not a hand, don't keep this, too many lands. Here, perfect keep. We have a turn 1 Carpet, potentially turn 1 Carpet and Birds, and then we have more Mana Dorks, we have a miscast for interaction, so turn 2 we're gonna have to get Thrasios into play and be able to use our miscast as we pass turn, and then sit and activate Thrasios as you're able to use miscast to deal with opponents. I really like this hand. Turn 1 Deathrite Shaman, turn 2 Dockside, and then Mana Bond, and then empty hand and explode. Great hand, absolutely amazing. Mana Bond and Life from the Loam, that's great. Don't keep this. Too few lands, won't get anywhere. You could gamble for Mana Bond here, but I would probably toss this deck, this hand away. Also a little bit too slow. Like, we have the Ad Nauseam, but we want some acceleration here. But as you can see, there is a skill requirement, and in mulliganing, you need to be able to find good hands with this deck. Hands that develops into something. But what is that something? What are we doing if we're not ad nauseam and winning? So Thrasios is the absolute boss of Valakut. Like I've said, I playtest a lot of other commanders like Gollus and Lord Windgrace, etc. But Thrasios' ability to put lands into play in instant speed during opponent's turn is absolutely amazing. This deck will snowball if you get to sit there and activate Thrasios too much. Because you're interacting with land dropping mountains into play, generating lightning bolts, but you're also increasing your mana production, which means you can activate Thrasios more and more and more, and eventually you're gonna be sitting with so many mountains that you're gonna activate Thrasios like 5 to 4 times in a turn cycle, which will snowball even more and more and more. So let's talk cards. Mana Bond, absolutely key. It's a combo card, you have to play it. But it's also really good inside this deck. It combos off greatly with Life from the Loam, great synergy, but I would like to compare Lion's Eye Diamond to Mana Bond. Often you see people keep openers where they can Lion's Eye Diamond cram into play early in the game, and you could view Mana Bond like the same. If you don't have access to your Thrasios, Life from the Loam is like an alternative commander, you could say. Great card, have to play this. You should mention that this is gonna put Ad Nauseam into your graveyard, and that could be really sad. It's really hard to get your Ad Nauseam back from that, except we do have a Noxus Revival, but proceed with this cautiously. I don't go for this like the first thing I do. Like, I do play Gamble inside this deck just because I could tutor for the Life from the Loam, accidentally discard it, I don't care, it's where I want it, and it will continue to do its work. But don't gamble for Ad Nauseam, gamble for Life from the Loam. Or, well, you could gamble for Ad Nauseam. Sometimes you don't entomb it. Biomancer's Familiar and Training Grounds have proven to be absolute auto-include must-haves for this deck, reducing the activation for Thrasios. That's you can get into a position where you're gonna have so much Thrasios activations that you're just gonna take over the game. This deck can grind to an extreme level if you get to that stage. Dark Confidant, absolutely must have for this deck. Really low CMC, only 2 mana, and the CMC deck ratio of this is tiny Ad Nauseam. Like, this is Ad Nauseam on legs, kinda, like once per turn. So, great card, play this. Turn 1 Mana Dork and color fixing, perfect, we need that. But also, this guy can interact with graveyards from opponents, but most importantly, you can gain life with this, so that you can increase your healthy stage, because you're gonna be being punched a bunch. So you can make sure that your life is going up a little bit so you can add NOS more effectively. But also, this is a deck that is like killing people manually in the late game with... We're gonna get to zombies soon, but also Valakut triggers. So this could help you kill your opponents with some group slug effect. So auto-include, play this. But color fixing is important in general because this is a heavy mountain deck that is producing a lot of red mana, so you want to have something that is like color fixing for you. You need to mulligan for forests, by the way, quite often. Because of that color fixing demand, Ragavan and Dockside have been a huge upgrade for this deck. And because of that color demand in red, you just have to play Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast here. I guess we should talk a little bit about this one. It's a little bit tricky to actually include it. It's really good right now, but 2 black pips is annoying. You don't want that. You want 1 black pip and then 1 colorless. So this is a card that you could potentially skip if your color fixing is a little bit tricky. Like, color fixing is a problem for this deck. You want to make sure that you're able to cast things. Scavenging Ooze, however, is actually quite great and something I really like for this deck. So we don't have enormous amount of green mana to activate this, but you can activate it a bunch. Easy to cast this, and Graveyards is kinda important to deal with as there are so many Underworld Breach decks out there. But this is gaining life, which is gonna stay healthy when you wanna add Nas, but also this is gonna be a blocker because people are gonna attack you, and it could be good to have a big creature sometimes that can just make sure you're not taking punches. I want to highlight Misha's Bubble and Ursa's Bubble. They are basically fillers. They cost 0, so they don't hurt when you want to add Nas, and they cantrip, basically auto-include. Literally there just to shrink the deck size and make sure you're staying around a really low CMC ratio for the deck overall. When I initially built this deck, I didn't include Mana Crypto, because like it flips, it hurts you, you can't add Nas that effectively, but I realized that it doesn't really affect it that much. You see, what Mana Crypt actually does is help you activate Thrasios a lot. And that's good. That means we're gonna dig through our deck, remove CMC cards that will hurt when you flip them to get them into your hand and out of the deck, or to the bottom of your library. But as it's helping you with that speed early in the game, you will usually find ad nauseam and maybe take some damage from the flips, but you won't suffer that much. It's okay. Also, it's great to actually use this to ritual out your ad nauseam from your hand, or cast this post ad nauseam. And when the game goes to a later stage where you're taking like a bunch of punches, you're at 20 life, it doesn't really matter that much. In the end, my experience, it's never been a problem to include play this. I play both Exploration and Burgeoning, obviously. So let's talk about Profane, Tutor and Ancestral Vision suspend cards. So they don't have a CMC at all. That's great. They don't hurt you when you flip into them with your ad nauseam, and that's important. And they have really powerful effects. So I've played with both of them, and I don't play with Ancestral Vision, but I do play with Profane Tutor. The simple reason is Suspend 4 is a little bit too much, but Suspend 2 have proven to be quite okay. This deck really likes to tutor. Either you want to find your ad nauseam or you want to find your Valakut, and Profane Tutor will work for this in both ways. But all the games I've played where I've suspend Ancestral Visions, if you suspend it turn 1, it will have an effect, but if you suspend it like turn 3, it's never gonna really happen, so I did cut it eventually. Slaughter, Pact, and Pact of Negation, absolute auto-include. Play these things, they are great. Thrasios is extra interesting with these cards. You can activate Thrasios and flip into them, and let's say you've tapped out because of that Thrasios activation, you can still cast these things to interact in instant speed if you're desperately. I'm really happy about these 2 new cards that have been printed. Now, when you activate Thrasios and you flip into them, they don't do anything, so that's kind of sad, but they are great. CMC 0 or CMC non-existing because they are lands, so Adnos flipping into these won't hurt you at all. This is where this deck gets super expensive, Tabernacle at the Pendrell Vale, but it's absolutely a must-have auto-include. This is great. We don't play that many creatures, like normally you're sitting with Thrasios in play, maybe Vile Smasher, maybe some Dorks, and that's it. But this is also a deck that has the mana. We're overproducing lands here, so yeah, this is a great card for this deck. I want to talk a lot about this one, Field of the Dead. It enters tapped, produces colorless mana, terrible. However, when Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Also, I want to mention something here. When you're building this deck, you want to have a mixture of snow-covered mountains and basic mountains, because to increase the name difference for this land. So what makes Valakut really strong is the ability to interact with creatures all over the place, killing them here and there with lightning bolts and instant speed. Like Valakut is great versus Tymna decks that just wanna sit there with your mid-range Tymna creatures and you go pew 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 on them. And then when you get like 3 Valakuts into play with your Vesuvian Thespian stage and other things like that, you're starting to punch people's faces when they don't have enough creatures in play anymore. But Field of the Dead have proven to help out in that regard, like you're putting zombies into play, and if you're able to remove creatures with your Valakut, the zombies goes through and you attack them and kill them eventually. So the Field of the Dead is here to pressure opponents, face damage, so to say. But I've also used them quite a lot to just have blockers. Blockers are good, especially to the part where the zombies from Field of the Dead enters untapped, so they can block when they come into play. That's good. I've actually won a game. Someone actually Praetor's grasped and removed Valakut from the game, so I couldn't do Valakut anymore. But I sat there and just grinded value with thrasios, drawing into counter spells and interaction here and there, and eventually killed people with just overrunning them with zombies. Like, eventually you get a lot of zombies with this deck. So I played Duress. Target opponent reveals his or her hand, you choose a non-creature non-land card from it, that player discards that card. I like it. But I have a personal preference on liking this. I mean, this is a card you could absolutely cut if you want to. They have printed a lot of new CMC 1 blue counter target non-creature spell and variations to offer you Contrafuse that's not in this deck, so you could easily replace Duress with something like that. The reason I play Duress is because I like to look at people's hand and kind of control what people are gonna do. But also post Nas, before I put my mana bond into play, I really like casting Duress on opponents just to make sure that they don't have interaction, like removing a counterspell or removing an Assassin's Trophy or Abrupt Decay. So let's talk Vile Smasher. She's here for Colored Entity. That's it. Actually, no. But first and foremost, she's here for Red Valakut Black Adnos. But I would like to showcase the X spell's synergy here. Meltdown. Destroy each artifact with a total casting cost of X or less. So if you cast this for just 1 red, you destroy all CMC 0 artifacts. That's good. There's a lot of those usually in cEDH. But then you can pay more. Like for 3 mana you will destroy all signets and arcane signets. It's very hard to find artifacts on CMC 3 or more. So 3 mana you destroy artifacts basically. We don't really care about that because we're not that heavy into the artifacts. There are some times where I don't even have artifacts in play. But the cool thing with Vile Smasher is that you can overpay on the X. You can make the CMC cost extremely high, especially with this deck that is putting a lot of lands into play. And this means that Vile Smasher will throw a bomb that is really huge. I have randomly tossed away like 20 damage to someone's face at random, and then next turn tossed away another 22 damage at someone's face. So Vile Smasher and X spells can function like a late game finisher when you're sitting there with thrasios just activating and taking over the game, but you've dealt so much damage to creatures all over the place that you don't have enough mountains remaining in the deck to get your Valakut triggers to kill face anymore. So you need some form of finisher, and this is something. Like Meltdown is a good card on its own, and it just synergizes with Vile Smasher here. And also I want to point out that you're really going out with style when you're killing people with this way. So this is absolutely a deck that could be built in a lot of different variations of ways. And let's talk about another thing. I mentioned before that the current total CMC cost of all cards together is at 45. This could go up. You could easily put it at something like 50. Because I've done a realization. Mana Bond puts the lands into play untapped. So what you're gonna do once you've digged through, let's go 70% of your deck, you have like 28 cards remaining in the deck or something like that, then you don't have lethal with all your mountains currently in your hand. But because we have so many Mox Diamonds, Chromox, Chain of Vapor, by the way, use Chain of Vapor to gain extra mana, sacrifice your lands to return your lands, Mox Diamonds and Chromox back to your hand to recast them, etc. And climb up to the mana you need to cast Mana Bond and Thrasios. Get Thrasios into play here. And then when you go to your discard phase with Mana Bond, you're gonna get a lot of Valakut triggers, not enough, but then with all the mountains that comes into play, you can tap them to continue to dig with Thrasios post the Mana Bond effect. And this is why you could increase the CMC ratio a little bit more, because Thrasios will solve the problem in the end of there. So what cards are worthy mentions for this deck? Gilded Drake, you could absolutely play this. Phantasmal Image, great. I mean, there's gonna be people who put Chroms into play. That's annoying, but Phantasmal Image becomes a Chrom blocker, but also a card, Chrom card draw, potentially, depending on. Cyclonic Rift should probably go back into this deck. I did take it out because of meta reasons, but now because of meta reasons, it's probably gonna go back into the deck again. Heuristic Study, a CMC free card. We had a rule against that, but you can actually break that rule. Rules are for breaking, so could absolutely play this. Especially in the current meta as it's currently like now. This is good right now. Sakura Tribe Scout. If you're building this deck on a budget, I would play this. I have played with this before and I kinda like it. It's great when you're sitting there and live from the loaming, and it's good in the early stage of the game. But then like later it just falls off and does nothing sometimes. You have to have live from the loam to make use of this in the later stage of the game. On the other hand, if you're live from the loam, you can use the lands to return this from the grave to the top of your library to increase the power of live from the loam. So yeah, it's a definite card you could have inside this deck. Arcane Signet, color fixing. You can use your red mana to get green, black and blue mana. That's good. 2 CMC, but color fixing is really good. And Tomb, we have a target, live from the loam. On the other hand, like, it kind of depends on how much you want to be on the live from the loam plan. By the way, this is a deck that is really good on the live from the loam plan, so Tomb could be a thing. Depends on how much you want to be on the live from the loam plan though. Renan 6, not great. I wouldn't play it myself, but like, it's a mini version of live from the loam. Could have it. I mean, the casting cost is making it playable here. I hope this gave you some insights and ideas for this cool deck of mine. And I would like to point out that the link in the description below of the video, deck list, is always changing as I'm making tweaks to this deck. And I do like to experiment and try new things. So don't take what you're seeing there as an ultimatum. But I am gonna have some sideboard cards now in the future so you can see alternatives. Cards that I do consider and cards that I take in and out now and then. Hope you liked the video. Take care guys, and I'll see you in the next one.